I'm Lena Dastilio. I'm at the University of Pittsburgh and currently serve as our Vice Chancellor for External Relations. And I'm so excited that Sean Hartman and Academic Search have agreed with Bobby Lauer from Campus Compact to bring an opportunity to those of us who are considered Chief Engagement Officers in the field around defining our next steps and navigating executive searches for executive roles at institutions. I think that we are all probably in a circumstance where we recognize that great leadership in higher education matters. And I personally would think that those of us coming out of the engagement space have a unique qualification for that. And I know Sean has a viewpoint on that very much that he's going to be sharing with us. So we're excited to dig in and spend some time together. It is a little bit of a cohort-esque fashion in the sense that we will not see too many new people joining us over the course of the series. We do have just a couple who are going to be participating who may not have been able to make it today. But I think it's going to be a really lovely conversation where we build some great familiarity amongst us and have almost like a gelled experience together. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bobby and get us started.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for being here. I think we're a small group. I think it would be great if it'd be comfortable for everybody to kind of introduce themselves so that everyone meets Sean to start with. And Sean has a good sense before he digs in. And then we've organized this, and Sean can jump in a second and give more clarity, but I think really around like both a very much learning and conversation sort of format. So definitely hoping to glean some knowledge from Sean, but then also just to have a confidential conversation amongst the group that's here around this work and kind of what this moment means. So why don't we just ping pong around real quick for some quick introductions. So I'm Bobby, the president of Campus Compact. Similar to Sean, have been in the teens, so it is frigid here in Baltimore, Maryland. And Amy, you are next on my screen.
Thank you, Bobby. I'm Amy Cohen. I'm the Assistant Vice Provost for the Honey Nashman Center for Civic Engagement and Public Service at George Washington University in DC, where it has been freezing cold.
Chris?
Hey everyone, Chris Naive. I'm the Associate Vice President and Endowed Chair at USD's Mulvaney Center, and it's good to be here with you all. I won't tell you what it looks like outside because, you know, classic California.
Kelsey?
Hey everyone, I'm Kelsey Otero. I'm the Senior Director of Community Engagement at Marquette University, and like many of you, it is quite chilly here. That we're thawing out a bit.
And then Matt?
Good afternoon, Matt Farley. I'm the Senior Vice President for Strategy with Campus Compact, so I'm not a Chief Engagement Officer. I play one on TV often, though, so I feel like I can hang out with you all for a bit. And I just want to note that I did see Chris about 2 weeks ago, and it was actually cold and rainy when I was in California for like the first time in months. So I don't know, Chris. We got to do a run back on that one.
Awesome. Anne?
Anne DePrince, Associate Vice Provost for Public Good Strategy and Research at the University of Denver, where it is unseasonably warm and just doesn't feel right.
Donna?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Donna San Miguel. I am the Executive Director of Community Relations at California State University, San Marcos, and I will also not mention the weather.
Jorge?
I think mostly good afternoon. I'm Jorge Atiles, and I'm Associate Vice President for Land Grant Engagement at West Virginia University.
And last but very much not least, our speaker and leader for this series that we're working with, Sean.
Well, it is great to be with you. Really looking forward to not just this time together, but our time over the next couple months together. This is really a passion project of mine. I believe so much in the work that you are doing that I want to be of support, and Academic Search wants to be of support, not just in your current place, but should you have other opportunities before you, but also as you mentor and grow others as well. Hopefully just providing some, just from what I've seen, I've been with Academic Search now starting my 11th year. So I've seen a few things, so search pre-COVID, post-COVID, pre-chaos, currently during chaos. So it's been interesting how things have changed. And our goal for today, as you saw, is really just kind of that's just trying to create a baseline. and kind of thinking about kind of where search is, share some insights. I will invite Lena and Bobby as well that know a little bit more about the specifics. I have not been a candidate in the search. I came from student affairs, and I came from student affairs a long time ago when I didn't even know they used search firms at institutions. I worked at two smaller institutions that didn't even know search firms existed when I was in higher ed at that time. So invite and of course invite you all as well. So my hope is not to spend more than the next 22 minutes kind of going over a few things at the most to provide us that time, kind of the last 15 minutes to really kind of, your insights, your questions, and kind of just think through the search process a little bit. So when we're beginning to think about search just a little bit, these are, whether you're mentoring, whether it's for you, and particularly in this time and place, you'll hear me. I joke all the time. I'm going to get a polo shirt that is just embroidered, why you, why them, why now? And that's just going to be the only thing on that shirt. Because I think if you think about your hiring experiences, the searches you've possibly been in, those are the questions we're trying to answer. And I think in this time and place, what we're seeing is as much a focus on those exact three questions as we are kind of, what have you accomplished? What have you done? Because tenures are shrinking across almost every position. We always know when the ACE presidential tenure study comes out, the presidential study comes out, it's always the biggest headline is always what presidential tenures are doing. Well, we could share them a lot of other tenures that have also been shrinking over that time that don't get kind of that same coverage. And so a lot of institutions are looking for that opportunity to say, why is it you? And why do you want to be here? Every interview I've ever been a part of has always started with a version of this question. And we've been asking that same question in almost every interview for decades. But I think the relevance of it now is a little bit more than what we've seen. And really, again, because of time and place, what is it you want? Or those that are mentoring, what is it they want out of the next opportunity? We are seeing a lot of positions that have been elevated up the leadership chain that are still the same position that are being now elevated back down. So we're seeing a lot of the consolidation, student affairs. We spent decades advocating for student affairs to be its own division with its own vice presidency with a seat. We're now seeing that again folded back into enrollment management or back into the provost's office. Enrollment management people have felt that wave of kind of vice presidency back, not director, executive director. And I think when we look at a lot of your roles as well, particularly depending on the size of the institution, we're also seeing a resetting of positions. And we're going to talk in a little bit about kind of what does that mean and how to translate it. But where are you going to get your joy? What is it folks are looking for in the next opportunity? Because the day jobs are just too difficult. And one of the things we learned through our presidential competency study, resiliency wasn't about digging deeper or working harder. It was, how do you fill the bucket up when it's empty? Because you can't dig any deeper than the bottom of the bucket. And so what are you putting in the bucket to dig a little bit? And again, most of you know this, but just again, a typical search is going to be some version of application materials. There's going to be interviews. Almost all of initial interviews, if not the entire process, is done via Zoom. That is, pre-COVID, we had a hard time getting, 11 years ago, we were still doing a lot of telephone interviews, believe it or not, 11 years ago. It wasn't even that unusual 11 years ago to be doing conference calls for interviews, but mostly via Zoom, maybe a couple rounds of Zoom, particularly depending on the level of the position. You might see a shorter Zoom, maybe a 20, 25-minute Zoom, with then a longer 45-minute hours Zoom as a second round. So kind of can we talk to a wider group of people and then narrow those folks down to a little bit longer before we invite people to campus. There is still pretty typically an on-campus component of most searches. We haven't seen them kind of start to finish online, but and then there's going to be that finalist interview stage, whatever it looks like. Whether it's a day, full day. I often call that an episode of Survivor instead of a finalist interview, because we start their day at 7 o'clock and we end at a dinner at 7 o'clock with the hiring authority, and we've asked them to be on that whole day, so it feels a little bit more like who's going to be voted on or off, instead of taking care of folks and showing them our best in that day, because we're trying to particularly one of the trends I've seen is we're condensing finalist interviews from a day and a half to a day, and kind of the wear and tear on candidates. So campus care and candidate care is a whole separate webinar series we can talk about in a different. I will note here, and I know this is being recorded, so I'm not going to, there's not a judgment in this, but do want to make folks aware that there is, in the search space, if a search firm's involved in the search, there has become, some of the commercial search firms are only requesting CVs, or they're having initial interviews that are more an informational interview, and it's much more information gathering on you. And so again, we'll talk about this in a second, but there's not, traditionally it's been, you put your CV together, you put your cover letter together, you submit it, the selection committee reviews them, invites folks. There are some of the larger commercial providers that are now, those are initial interviews, and there may only be inviting a cover letter if they want to advance you. Or so they're submitting more slates for kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down review than kind of the traditional process, which a lot of us went through, which was put the packet together, submit the packet to committee. So just knowing the process and making sure that you have clarity on, if you have a call with a search consultant, particularly what the purpose of that call is, just to make sure you're not caught unaware. We do 3 leadership development programs. In those programs, it is not unusual. I just had one last week that said, I just got a rejection email from a search I didn't know I was in, because I thought it was just an information. And it turns out that senior consultant was actually interviewing them to whether they were going to advance them. And so they sent a thank you, but no thank you note, not even knowing they were in it. So making sure there's clarity up front, especially the more senior the role and depending on who the search firm is. I'm not going to go over these. We can share these out afterwards, but I think my main takeaway from kind of setting yourself up for success is your network, and utilizing that both pre-application and during the process, making sure that you understand context, that you get some insights. We tend to, if we remember the search process, we whittle down candidates. We don't proactively put them in. And so what that translates into is we look for reasons to take people out of a pool, or we look to only move certain people forward. And so with that, candidates can accidentally step in something that it was unintentional, that maybe somebody from their network. So I'll give you an example. When people get too, like, I've done this work, I can do this exact program for you. They may have tried that program and it didn't work, or there might be some baggage with that program, and you unintentionally, you're just trying to illustrate your experiences. And so instead of looking at, I've developed programs, I know how to develop a program, or this engagement, or do this work, this type of engagement. And so just knowing some context and having your network be able to share some of that with you just reduces that chance. I will say one of the challenges I see, and again, I'm a little more in tune with this, so I do pay attention because I have such a passion for the work that you all are doing. Is I think one of the biggest challenges I see in the search process is that we don't want to talk down to people to assume they don't know, but I actually think the inverse is the case, which is people don't always understand what you do, and how you're doing it, how you're reaching across the campus, how you're reaching across divisions. That if you're not in academic affairs, how have you worked with academic affairs? Or if you're in this piece, where are you at with this? So I do think one of the challenge we have, particularly from community and civic engagement folks, is we do have to translate a little more than what we might feel comfortable with, simply because they don't. And particularly because, especially if somebody's moving from a larger institution to a smaller, their person like you may have 3 different roles. That it may not be their primary work. And so they don't have a good understanding of what your role is. And so translating that and making sure that, that we're giving them that insight into the depth of the work you've done. I think in a roundabout way, many searches are looking for the skills and attributes and the gifts and graces that you all bring, but how we translate those into actionable, definable in their context. Because again, it's about their context. And let's not make a mistake, there is bias, particularly if you want to move from a large school to a smaller school to another school. Heaven forbid you try and change sectors. And then it's all, well, what would you know about us? The point is you're bringing skills, gifts, and graces that translate. But you have to do that for them. No search committee does that work on your behalf. So how do you translate that for folks? And the other piece I want to pick up here is for internal candidates, if you're looking at advancement on your own campuses, nobody's really been paying attention to all your victories or everything you've done. And so my suggestion is you approach that as if you would approach it from an outside opportunity, because nobody's paying attention. Or what typically happens is they forgot you did something until you remind them. So you're like, oh, I led this initiative. This is what happened. And they're like, oh, that's right. You did do that, didn't you? I forgot that. So we can't assume that even on an internal search that they're remembering or paying attention either. Or just the language we're using, the acronyms, how we describe things, is that, and so the piece I want to leave, and we'll get into the question and answer, is if you in this, it's always been difficult, but I think even more so in our time and place, is if you are seeking or mentoring those that are looking at search at full time, it's another full-time job on top of their full-time job, on top of whatever responsibilities they have outside of employment. And whatever parent care, family care, dog care, whatever the other pieces are, this is another piece on top of them. And one of the challenges I'm seeing, particularly for those that have been let go, reduced, their positions have been changed, they're also managing a grieving process on top of all of this. Because you're grieving the loss of your opportunity and what you had. And so now you have all of your functional duties and you're managing a grieving process on top of that, for either where you wanted to go, your institution, the position, whatever your process looks like for you. And so thinking about how are you going to be good to yourself? And we talk a lot about that. The whole resiliency, it cracks me up now, because I've been doing some work on this. So like I was even in Staples the other day doing an Amazon return, and the whole bookshelf was all on resiliency. But it really is, I do really think there's a piece of this, which is when you're applying for searches, you're putting in your time, you're putting in your effort, especially if you make a semifinalist or a finalist round, you have invested amount of time. I always joke that for men, I think they buy ties in the colors of that institution that they would never wear. You're never going to need a fuchsia and orange tie again in your life. Women, you may have bought a scarf or something that matches the institutional colors. You're never going to wear that scarf again. But it was part, so you've made literally a financial and emotional investment in this opportunity, but only one person can be successful. And we know that the data really shows us too that men's number one fear is rejection. Women's number one fear in the process is not being useful or able to meet the needs. And so we're also, when we do that, we have another emotional roller coaster that happens in the process. And so in this time and place, as you think about search, and we can certainly talk more about the ins and outs of the search process here in a minute, but not only with this workshop, but also the feedback you get. So if a search consultant's involved, they may offer some feedback. Take what you like and throw away what you don't. Do not try and internalize. And again, I know this is easy for me to say, but if somebody said something that just really ticked you off, it is really okay to say, well, that was your opinion, or that was the search committee's opinion. Thank you very much. I disagree. Then that just means it wasn't the right fit. I know fit's a discriminatory word, and I know in a lot of cases we use it to be discriminatory. But I do think there is a real piece in this time and place than it is for you to say, I just didn't like that piece. I just don't disagree. That's not who I am. I can't be authentically me. If you say I am too bubbly and the committee thinks I am too bubbly, that is not something that is me. And I'm not going to change it in the interview process because that's not how I'm going to live it out afterwards. Someday, if you want to get me on a soapbox, by the way, ask me about sense of humor being involved in job descriptions or search profiles. Sends me into orbit because I want the next search committee that uses that sense of humor to have a stand-up mic night for all of their candidates because I want to see how you're going to measure that. What I think they're trying to get at is empathy, approachability. I think they're trying to get at something, but they use sense of humor in a way that I just don't think it's not the right use. My grandmother's British. I have a very British sense of humor. I think John Kerry I think all of his movies are awful. Does that make me wrong? So I really want to know how we're going to measure that someday. As we get into the questions, there's no candidate advocate in the process. That is kind of one of the darker sides of search, that when a search organization is hired by the campus, their duty is to the campus. So you really need to trust your gut in a search process. I would say this particularly for women and particularly for candidates of color. If you don't feel recognized in that search or something does not sit with you correctly, you need to trust your gut in that process. Now, we particularly believe in candidate care. We believe the best way to have a successful search is to care for our candidates and keep them informed, be proactive, help support you at all interview stages, and do as much as we can. But at the end of the day, there's not an ombuds in most campuses for candidates in a search process. And so making sure you're trusting your own instincts, using your networks and testing things with others. Is this right? And at the end of the day, all you can do is your best. There's a lot of, typically by the time you make the semifinalist or finalist round, everybody can do the job. There's usually not an issue of competency when it comes to finalists, particularly, or semifinalists. Most people can do the job. And so that is simply about who can answer why you, why now, why them the best. And that's what a lot of campuses, are you going to stay? I mean, we have search committees now asking, how long do you intend to stay here? It's an unfair question. I think it's a setup question. I would encourage a search committee not to ask it, but I think it is predominantly, especially in student affairs, deanships, other roles where we see people cycling out every 2 or 3 years. They want some stability. And I think we're looking at those pieces. And, I will just close my portion before we get to the questions on campuses still want good people doing good things for amazing students. Even with all of that is swirling around us and swirling kind of every day, there are still good people wanting good people. And I think how we try and get there, and how we try and answer that why you, why now them is important. But as either you yourself enter the process or you mentor, it's still about good people doing good things at good institutions. And I think in the stress of the times, we can lose that piece of the process.